Morning. Very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Saturday fevers. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, starting off with the day 3 of Cypher 2017, the third edition out here at Hall Arabica. Just to introduce quickly, Cypher India's most wide-reaching flagship conference on analytics is hosted by Analytics India magazine. This is the third edition of Cypher, India's largest and most exciting analytics summit that offers a platform to network and learn from the leading thought leaders, companies, and startups in analytics, data science, and artificial intelligence discipline. Analytics India magazine is India's #1 platform on analytics dedicated to passionately championing and promoting the analytics ecosystem in India. Founded in the year 2012 by Bhaskar Gupta, Analytics India magazine has been a preeminent source of news, information, and analysis for the Indian analytics ecosystem. Well, once again, repeating for the ones who have not downloaded the app yet, the Cypher app, request you all to download because there are a few schedules that are being changed and we are updating that directly on the app. So the app is absolutely updated and you can follow the app for all the schedules and the details on the speakers. And meanwhile, a quick run through the competitions that we have at Cypher 2017. We have something called a Cypher Selfie, wherein you just have to click a selfie and post it on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram. That's basically the social media with hashtags #Cypher2017 or #Cypher17selfie and tag Analytics India magazine, and you stand a chance to walk away with both speakers. And Cypher Appster, you have to engage people. I mean, basically, you just have to increase your engagement with the app by posting, liking, and sharing about the event. And 3 participants end of the Cypher 2017, that is today, the day 3, walk away with the prizes, wherein the first prize being an iPhone 7, the second prize being an iPad, and the third prize being a Nikon camera. There's something called a Cypher Opinion, wherein you get a chance to provide your feedback, your opinion on the feedback or the opinion board right outside the Hall Arabica. And one lucky winner walks away with a Fitbit. That's each day. That's about it on the competitions, ladies and gentlemen. Moving forward, the very first session for day 3 out here at Hall Arabica, that is use of machine learning to predict clinical deterioration. Identification of patients at risk for clinical deterioration can effectively improve patient outcome through earlier intervention and better care. While machine learning models are pervasive in business analytics, their usage in the medical community, particularly in risk prediction, is limited. This current talk is going to explore challenges and potential solutions in identifying both patient level and care level risk factors, as well as the application of current machine learning platforms. Ladies and gentlemen, the speaker's research interests lies in the application of statistical and machine learning algorithms for life science and medical studies. His work currently focuses on statistical modeling and analytics research for clinical data towards improving patient outcome and hospital care. He teaches applied clinical or research informatics in the biomedical master's program and applied data analysis in the master's in computer science program. Ladies and gentlemen, he is the research assistant professor at University of Chicago. Please put your hands together and welcome Anoop M. Mayampurath.
Introduction. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for coming on a Saturday. Today, I'm going to be talking about healthcare and analytics, what we do. What we'll start off is, we kind of start off slightly broad. We'll talk about what it means to do analytics in healthcare, what kind of data we use, what methods we use, and definitely touch upon challenges. But towards the end of the presentation, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about my own personal research interest. So just to give you a background of the setting, this is a picture of the campus of University of Chicago. As you can see, the skyline is of downtown Chicago is in the background, and on the right side over here is the old campus, which is mostly 19th century buildings. On the left side of the picture is the newly built hospital. The essential point being that the hospital is located right at the center of campus, and this makes my life easier in many ways in terms of data analysis and proximity to data. When we talk about healthcare and analytics, most of the work is done in the insurance market. US has a very vibrant insurance industry, especially with Obamacare on the market, and most insurance companies do statistical modeling to price risk. There is also definite analytics research that goes towards hospital operations. So every hospital in the US has a quality office or a department that basically keeps track of the hospital budget, the cost, the patient turnover, the monthly targets, and so on and so forth. They basically run the hospital like an individual corporation of its own. But what I'm interested in is a slightly more niche, is basically I try to predict patient outcome within the hospital. My interest starts when the patient gets admitted to a hospital, and for me, time zero is that time point. And from then on, I try to predict which patients are at risk for clinical deterioration and at what time they are at risk for clinical deterioration. In order to think about what specific outcomes, what do I mean by clinical deterioration, we look at the leading causes of mortality in the United States. The first one is cancer, and the second one is cardiac arrest. Among cardiac arrests, approximately 200,000 of those cardiac arrests occur in the hospital. The third leading cause of mortality in the US is medical error. It's quite astonishing, actually. These are basically mistakes made by the hospital in terms of giving the patient wrong blood, making the wrong diagnosis, not catching things too early, such as if a patient has a known allergy to a medication, the care team just didn't look through the records properly. They give the medication anyway, and the patient crashes. So these are known things that happen, and just to give an idea of what it means to give a wrong diagnosis, this particular study was conducted in 2014, where 23 radiologists were given these scans of lung nodules, and they were asked to identify which ones are the tumor cells. And sure enough, a lot of them identified the tumor cells, but a majority of it missed a picture of a gorilla. So the study team actually inserted a gorilla picture, which is right over there, if you can see it. And about 83% completely missed the gorilla picture in the scan. So this is just to show you that doctors are human, just like all of us. They have their stress levels, they have their anxiety, they are under tremendous pressure, and they always make mistakes. And our job as data scientists is to try and prevent that from data. The other type of, this is another point to drive home that medical errors usually preventable harms is about 400,000, which is at par of cardiac arrest. You're having the same amount of cardiac arrest in a hospital as medical arrest, which is astonishing, right? The last thing that I'm interested in is infection. And this is what I mean by infection is hospital-acquired infection. So patient comes into a hospital, they start out okay, but then during their stay, they come in contact with some bacterial or virus. And because their immune system might not be the best in health, the bacteria completely takes over. And soon you're fighting infection, and in a short amount of time, if you're not careful, organ dysfunction occurs and death occurs. How exactly is this, how serious is this problem? There was a study that happened in 2013 that measured death rates in the hospital over the last 10 years, from 2000 to 2010. Every single category of these diagnoses had a negative percentage in change, if you see over here, except for sepsis, which is infection. Sepsis had a 17% growth in deaths over the 10 decades. So this is a clearly high-stakes area where numbers matter, lives matter, and the question is, what can we do? Sepsis also affects different people differently in subpopulations, such as the one I'm interested in is children with cancer. These are patients who have cancer. They come to the hospital, they take surgery, they take chemotherapy, at which point their immune system is completely shut down. So they're really prone to infection. 1 out of 4 kids with sepsis will die. And 1 out of 3 people who undergo a surgical transformation, such as a stem cell transplant, will die. These are very, very high numbers. And whatever we can do to increase or the survival translates to a very high extent. So the real question is, what can data do, right? In order to understand that, we have to think about what I deal with on a daily basis. So these are a list of data elements that are available to me in my work. There's vital sign ratings, which is heart rate, respiratory rate, blood pressure, oxygen monitoring, every single vital sign rating in the patient. There's also available to me a list of lab tests that have been ordered. These lab tests may be to measure how good your body is, such as levels of potassium, sodium, so on and so forth in your body. There may be other set of lab tests that are measuring basically whether or not you have an infection. So they take a blood test, they culture it, and see whether or not you have a bacteria in your body or not. There's a list of medications that every patient is given, and their time stamp, and their dosage, and amount, when they were started, when they were stopped. There's a list of diagnoses that the care team made. So doctors might have made a diagnosis for a patient, and they might have undergone certain procedures, such as X-rays, or CT scans, or MRI scans. All these are important information that we capture. There's patient characteristics, of course, such as age, demographics, gender, so on and so forth. And there's also narrative text in the form of patient notes. Nurses are notorious for writing detailed descriptions of care. It's how they keep track of their patients, so they write everything and anything that they can think of in their notes. And they're really valuable information in there. One thing that sets us apart from any other business analytics domain is the presence of time. Each of these data element has a timestamp associated with it, and usage of that time is very crucial in our research and in any hospital analytics. And the reason is time is a very important factor in preventing any sort of clinical deterioration. As an example, consider sepsis. The patient has an infection on the left-hand side. They start showing outward signs of infection, so they start showing fever, they start showing chills, at which point the doctor thinks, okay, it's time to order a blood test. Okay, by the time the blood test comes, it's going to be 3 days or a day or so, so let's start the patient on antibiotics. That period of time is this middle period right here. If you're not careful, and we don't monitor the patient enough, pretty soon the organs start shutting down, at which point it's too late to do anything. This golden period is supposed to be around 6 hours. So basically, the doctors are given a 6-hour window to recover, going from sepsis back into active to get that infection under control. But what is completely unknown is this period right here. Data will tell you that the patient has an active state of infection. Nobody's just looked at it yet. They only look at the signs for it, such as fever. But a trending heart rate or a trending increase in temperature are clear signs of infection. So this is where we work, this time period over here. So if we can extend that 6 hours even by an hour or 8 hours or 12 hours, that gives us doctors a lot more time to do their work. The second thing is that patients predict. They do tell you when bad things are going to happen to them. Around 75 to 80% show some signs of physiological abnormality before undergoing a cardiac arrest. And 80% of these are potentially preventable. So if you catch them in time, you can prevent them. So this is one of those areas where immediate intervention really helps. If you can identify who's at risk, then the turnaround time is so less that you can make a difference. One problem is that many electronic health record data is like this. It's jumbled up, it's measured, it's impossible to go through. So the first order of business that any hospital takes this pile of junk and categorizes it. Now you have separate areas for separate tables for medications, separate tables for labs, separate tables for vitals, all linked by patient ID and a corresponding timestamp. So being in campus right next to a hospital with a really good clinical data engineering team is a boon. That's the step. Your data science is only good as how organized your data is. And so and not only that, you should have a sort of a pipeline, sort of a way where you go in and ask for these set of variables, and you get that at the end of the pipeline. So this setup is there in University of Chicago, and currently we have about patient records going back from 2006, so slightly more than a decade, about 850,000 patients. Slightly under 1 million patient admissions and visitations with a bunch of labs, medications, diagnoses, and labs. And remember, all these are time-stamped as well. One example of a really good prediction model is something that was developed by my collaborators at the University of Chicago, is the Ecot study. And what they did was they took all the patient vital signs, such as heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen, age, and so on and so forth, and they developed an early warning score called the Ecot Score. The Ecot Score is essentially a probability measure. It tells you what is the probability that a patient will have a cardiac arrest or deteriorate in the next 6 hours. That helps because now you can transition that probability into a picture format, saying with a color gradient. So currently, right now, nurses at University of Chicago Hospital is walking around with this color scheme in their hands. Every time a patient goes from medium risk and starts trending towards high risk, they call in a rapid response team way ahead in time. So this is one of those examples of study that germinated in a research group and got implemented in a hospital currently. For the techies out there, this sort of modeling is pretty interesting. Like I said, our time zero begins when patient is admitted to the hospital. And from then on, the entire time period is divided into 6-hour blocks. And what this study does is, given that you have a heart rate of X, blood pressure of Y, and oxygen saturation of Z, and so on and so forth, the last 6 hours, what is the probability that you will get a heart attack in the next 6 hours? And those sort of models are really, really useful because, like I said, the period of intervention is very, very small. It's 6 hours, right? So anytime you can so you're talking about 6 hours ahead of those 6 hours. So that really gives a 12-hour window to prevent cardiac arrest. This particular modeling is called as discrete time survival analysis. And these guys used logistic regression after dividing these data into these 6-hour bins. In 2017, they developed a model. They tested different models with the same sort of data. And of course, you go from logistic regression. When you go to random forest, you see a definite increase in your AUC from 0.75 to 0.80. It's not much, but still it is a good, reasonable good increase. But sadly, this is the state of the art in hospital. This is considered one of the premier studies in hospital risk prediction. Things like deep learning haven't yet made their way into the hospital. There's one example of deep learning done by a group at Google. What they did was they took retinopathy images from 3 different hospitals. One of them is actually an Indian hospital. And they were able to create a deep learning network for diagnosing diabetic retinopathy from scans. And then during this process, they were able to get really high sensitivity and specificity, which is understandable because deep learning works really well with images. And so anytime you have an image such as retinopathy scans or cardiography scans or radiology scan images, you're able to do very well. So in order to understand why, I would say that from analytics point of view, the medical industry is about at least a decade behind Netflix or Facebook or advertising. In order to understand why this is, there are several challenges that we encounter. One is that the noise is high dimensional because there's many different values of the same patient. It's noisy and missing, which is really not that big a problem. I mean, people in the social networks have very sparse data. People in human psychology studies have sparse data. Communications have sparse data. So it's not really truly that surprising. And that's manageable. There's also different heterogeneous categories of data, like labs, meds, vital signs. All of them have to be merged together at some point before we do some sort of a machine learning. And that is also not that uncommon in different industries. Now, here's where we start to get slightly different. One is, this is where bias takes place, but there's a systematic bias in how hospitals record data. There's 4 different ways that people identify infection. There's 4. One nurse could say it's one way, another nurse would say it's another way. A completely different hospital will say it's ways 3 and 4. So in order to tease out infection, if you have 4 things that you have to look for, who knows, there could be a 5th or a 6th, right, that you haven't thought of. So systematic bias that comes from just hospital practice and record of data is present everywhere. So not only is your data science now dependent on organization of data, but your organization's data is now dependent on how good your data is, how true your data is. And that's a very hard measure to pin down, how true your data is, just because people record things differently. Another thing that keeps us slightly apart from other business analytics is use of domain knowledge. Nowhere do we really have to know so much about the domain. I mean, I really had to get into hospital practice. I had to understand right from how shift changes occurs to what does sodium measure in your body, what does potassium measure in your body. So you really have to go deeply into your domain knowledge from which you can, in order to really make a difference. The other two things that kind of keep apart from us is in the emphasis of interpretability. And this is sort of a drawback among the medical industry. If you tell a doctor that, hey, I've developed a really good neural network algorithm that gives you 90% accuracy on who gets a cardiac arrest, the doctor will say, great, now tell me what to look for. They will not be happy with the black box interpretation of a model. They want to know which variables are important, who drives the effect, whether it's increasing the risk of cardiac arrest or decreasing the risk of cardiac arrest, and exactly by how much. That is a very, very hard thing to do. So you saw the previous research that went from logistic regression to random forest, and clearly you know that logistic regression is the most interpretable model, where you can actually tell what the strength and the direction of the association is. But when we go to random forest and deep learning, you lose all interpretability, right? So which is one of the reasons why these complex models have yet to take place in medical practice, is clearly because doctors don't like black boxes. They want to know what is driving the effect. Basically, you're trying to prove to them that you can do a better job at them in identifying patients, right? So you want to make sure that they understand that and get it. But slowly, the things are turning around, especially when you try to convince them these are high stakes, patients are, lives are at stake. If these models will help you, then they slowly get it and they'll come around. So hopefully. The last is the most challenging, is patient privacy. If you are a patient, your data belongs to you and nobody else. Hospitals cannot give away your data to anybody, not even to insurance groups, not even to social media, not even to newspapers, nothing, right? That data belongs to only you. So this is a very high thing to do. So now we can't use the cloud because it is not private. All our computation is done within the University of Chicago network and on University of Chicago cluster computing. So patient privacy is paramount of importance to us. At the same time, it does limit us in what we can do. So this is where I sort of veer off and talk about my own research. What I'm interested in is not thinking about just the patient level factors. So you saw the model where you can take heart rate, respiratory rate, and so on and so forth, and try and predict when a patient will have a cardiac arrest. My interest is saying what else could drive the effect. In particular, is it something in the hospital that could be modeled? So in order to do this, we have to sort of think of what is meant by these non-patient factors. So consider a hospital where you have an ICU and a general ward. Whenever the ICU is full, they just can't take in any more patients. So for the next several hours, whoever's at risk for deterioration in the ward, just stay in the ward. So as a result, the number of cardiac arrests in the ward will go up, right? What about if you happen to be admitted at a time that there is a shift change? Shift change happens at 5 a.m., 7 p.m., and 10 p.m. At 7 p.m., if you get admitted to the hospital, what does that mean? There's a lot of in and out that goes off. There's a lot of patients are getting handed off from one nurse to the other. There's a lot of confusion. And it turns out that if you were admitted during such a period, your mortality, your risk of dying goes up. So this sort of is slightly crazy, right? Not only are you sick, but your care and your outcome is now dependent on everybody else around you. So we ask the question, if you're admitted in a hospital ward and something bad on the ward happens, well, how does that impact your care? If I'm a patient and the patient across me has a cardiac arrest or a sudden deterioration that prompted everybody to run to that patient, how does that affect you? And it turns out that it affects us tremendously. If you're on a ward and there was one cardiac arrest on the ward, your risk of having a cardiac arrest yourself goes up by 18% in the next 6 hours. If you're on a ward and if there were 2 or more cardiac arrests in the last 6 hours, your risk goes up by 53%, which is huge and astonishing. So not only is patient level factors important, but your neighborhood is also important. It also turns out that for every cardiac arrest event that happens on a ward that you happen to stay in, you spend more time in the hospital. Your length of stay, which is basically the period at which you admitted, goes up by 3 days for every single cardiac arrest that you have in the ward, which is big, right? You're paying more money just because your neighbor had a cardiac arrest. Our theory is that these events are disruptive. Whenever these patient crashes, everybody just rushes to that one patient. And I've seen this happen over and over. This is one of those cases where I don't think country matters. I think I've seen this in Indian hospitals as well. Everybody rushes to that one patient. The doctors come in, the nurses come in, even if they're not tied to that patient, they still come in. The residents come in the hope that they can learn something. The students come in. Over the next few hours, everybody is in this recovery mode and emergency handling mode. That's great for that one patient, but what about everybody else, right? So there is some qualitative study that says that workplace interruptions decreases efficiency, increases medication errors, and disrupts normal health hospital routine. But these are qualitative, these are survey-based. Ours was the first real quantitative based on 80,000 patients that we were able to show this effect. The next question that we asked is, does the location of patient admission matter? So if you're in a ward and you get admitted to a room that's right next to a nurse's office, does that help you compared to somebody else who was admitted away from the nurse's office? And it turns out not so much. The nurse's office is not really dependent because nurses these days are very mobile. They take their computers, they travel back and forth, they really check up on a lot of patients. But what does matter is whether you're admitted closer to the entrance of the ward or at the end of the ward. And it turns out that if you're admitted to the end of the ward, you're more likely to stay one more day or half a more day than patients who are admitted to the front of the ward, just because you're at the end of the ward and nobody really thinks about the patient in the corner rooms. So in conclusion,